Okay, so we're going to walk you through how to get a hyperlapse in specific. But if you want one here, and we'll link to it, get just a general option below. It might be helpful to have a grip on that before diving into this more advanced version. So in a nutshell, the motion from the hyperlapse actually comes from the camera itself taking the pictures, moving through 3D space. We could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I'm pretty sure you want to get quickly to the how-to section. So let's just dive right into it. We're going to quickly rip through the list of things that you need to do, and then we'll go over each one in specific. So what do? Find a beautiful location. Dial in your camera settings. Choose a focal point for your hyperlapse. Take a picture. Move a bit closer. Take another picture. Move a bit closer. Take another picture. And then rinse and repeat until you're satisfied. Okay, so that's the basic process. But let's actually delve into that a little.
This video
a little bit more. There's a lot going on all the time, which can make the things happening to really sell the fact that time is passing part of a hyperlapse really easy. First question, tripod or no tripod? That's really up to you. You can use a tripod if you want, but for this example, I'm just gonna go handheld. Why? Because it's way faster. To get absolutely perfect, buttery smooth hyperlapses, you're probably gonna have more success working with a tripod. You'll have a higher likelihood of getting really smooth shots like this, and less shaky and jittery shots like this. That doesn't mean smooth hyperlapses are impossible without a tripod, it's just another option. But going forward, everything that we talk about can be done with either handheld or tripod methods. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is find a really great location. A hyperlapse will look kind of dull if there's really nothing going on in your shot. My suggestion? Go outdoors in public and focus on one landmark of significance. Why? Because if there's clouds and people moving all around, it's going to be way easier to see the time passing by. And by focusing on a landmark, you're giving your shot a subject for the viewer's attention to be focused on, giving direction and purpose to your hyperlapse. One of the biggest problems with a lot of hyperlapses is even if they're beautiful, they kind of just wander aimlessly. But if you focus on a subject, you're saying this. This right here is your goal. Focus on that as you go through your motion. Now that you have your location chosen, here's a quick tip. Go into your camera settings and turn on as many guides and measurements as possible so that you can more easily line up your images. I have my rule of thirds grid on here, a center point marker, as well as a level. Once you've got all that down, dive into your settings again and make sure that everything's set to manual. You don't want any automatic exposure changes happening, otherwise you're going to get flickering. Adjust your shutter speed, ISO, and aperture to make a properly exposed shot. This means that it's not so bright that things are getting blown out in the whites, and not so dark that things are getting lost in the blacks. Now that your settings are dialed in, how do you actually make sure that you're going to take each shot really consistently, especially if you're going handheld? You'll want to be able to find specific points on your subject to be able to line up with every single time. This will really help you to keep your framing consistent even if you're taking dozens, if not hundreds of photos. So for me, I'm going to choose a point on the subject right about here. And you can place it on either. Once you choose that point, on the crosshair in the center of frame. Nice and simple to replicate. From here, one step. If you want to walk 3 steps or 10 steps, that's totally up to you. Just whatever you choose, battery sprig moving through space. It's a really cool effect. Okay, so now that we've taken our first picture, take another shot. Take a step, line it up, and take the shot. Rinse and repeat. So the question is now, when do you stop? You actually ask your seconds, 100 and achieve that. I will be your, and you might think that a technique like this would require super film. And here's the object. It's gonna look a lot screen in the actual physical location where you want to place your subject. It's gonna look a lot more realistic. If I take the same and complete face, you're gonna, it's got all these shadows everywhere. It's gonna be really difficult. So if you're in this boat, a really easy example, I had my green screen just to move your green screen farther away from your subject. In this example, I had my green screen the field about f2.2 or so that the background was actually blurry. Now the green screen all melted the field and completely enveloped, but that's okay. Make sure that when you're sound, they're not, this help to make just sound. Not too far. Cover this with record. Absolutely to stop no change rolling, as long as you've got your set up only to optimal center of the magic. Then place layer, subject, go through your frame and see the full range of motion that your subject has, and make sure that it's with the feet jutting out of frame, try not you can looking out. H for the hand tool, which when you bring this up, you can bring this back feather down to about your start ultra coverage subject here, and I'll link to it in the description below. But once our green is key tutorial here, and I'll link to it in the description below. But once our green screen, we're actually green screening at all to begin with. I mean, why ground is they're just locked off in space. Which, if that actually air, like there's no keying would move with our subject because there's your subject to actually separate them from to do that. What I find can help too is by that when your subject is sitting where everywhere is going to be really difficult. So if you're in this boat, a really easy solution is actually just to move your green screen farther away from your subject. In this example, I had my green screen about 20 feet or so behind my actual subject point. And I had a shallow enough depth of field, about f2.2 or so that the background was actually blurry. Now the green screen all melds together into a little bit more of a uniform color. Those 2 points of having a shallow depth of field and having your green screen farther away from your subject will help you to get a more successful key, in a pinch. Then just make sure that when your subject is sitting where they need to be, that the green screen completely envelops them all the way around. In this example, my feet are sticking down the bottom a little bit, but that's okay because they're not actually moving, at least not like my head and my hands are. If anything's gonna dip out of frame, this is the best place. And thirdly, having your green screen that far away from your subject will really help to make sure that your subject doesn't cast any shadows onto it. Now that we've got our green screen set up, let's lock down our camera and really make sure that it's in place, so that even if somebody were to touch it just a little bit, it's not going anywhere. Make sure that you've got something to elevate your subject above the ground. I have this stool here, which is all I'm gonna need to get myself a bit off the ground, not too far. I wanna make it look like I'm just floating a little bit and not like I'm soaring above the ground. We're not going to cover this with a green screen actually, and we'll come back to that just a little bit later. Now that that's set up, it's time to record. Hit the record button and go through your lines as many times as possible until you're absolutely sure that you've got the take that you want. Make sure not to touch the camera during this process and not to stop the recording. You want to make sure that there's absolutely no changes to your scene whatsoever, and that there's no changes to your framing in specific. Once you're sure you've got your take and your camera's still rolling, strike the set completely and get a complete clean plate. Let it roll for at least as long as you've got your good take for. For me, that was about 20 to 30 seconds. If you've got a really elaborate setup and it's going to take a little while to actually strike your set, that's okay. Just be really careful to only touch the record button very gently and don't change your framing at all. This is not the optimal solution, but if it's a 15-minute takedown and you're not going to have enough recording space, it's the better of the two options. Now it's time to bring all of your footage into Premiere Pro where we can begin the magic. Place the take of your subject that you like on your timeline, and then bring it up a few layers. Then place your clean plate down underneath it. So right now, if you were to rapidly turn on and off your top layer, you should see that the landscape in general stays the same, with only your green screen, subject, and elevation tool being removed from the frame. Now make a mask around your subject. Go through your frame and see the full range of motion that your subject has, and make sure that at all times your mask isn't cutting off a limb. For us, at the bottom here, we have some problems with the feet jutting out of frame, but that's okay, because we're actually just gonna cut that out with the mask. I made sure to try and not move my my feet at all during this process to make it a lot easier. Mask as tightly as you can around each of the individual areas of your subject's legs, assuming that's the piece that's poking out. To dive in and get really fine detail, a good idea is to have your hands over two keys. H for the hand tool, which when you bring this up, you can move your frame all around without actually messing anything up. And then P for the pen tool. Bring this back up to continue drawing your mask. Once you finish your mask outline, you're going to want to drop that feather down to about 3 or 4. And this is what you should be left with. You can already get the impression that you're starting to float a little bit. Now here comes the green screening part. Search for the effect Ultra key, drop it on, and then take the eyedropper tool and then try to find the most average color of green on your backdrop. What I find can help too is by choosing something that's closer to your subject. If you need more help with your green screen key at this point, then we would suggest looking at this tutorial here, and I'll link to it in the description below. But once our green screen is keyed out, then we're left with this. And this is the point at which we're going to explain why we're actually green screening at all to begin with. I mean, why couldn't I just sit on the stool, mask that out, and use the clean plate to make up for where the ground is missing? Well, you could do that, but then your subject isn't actually floating, they're just locked off in space. Which, if that's the look that you're going for, you can totally do it that way. But what I wanted was for my subject to actually be floating, bobbing up and down a little bit, making it look like they're actually hovering in air. And when you think of that happening, your subject isn't perfectly still like they're sitting on something, it's like there's this force field that's sort of like maneuvering them around in midair. And if we were to try to do that without keying out our subject from a green screen, this is what it would look like. The entire frame would move with our subject because there's no way to actually separate them from the rest of the frame. I mean, you could try and mask. Hi guys, Jordan with Motion Array, and today's hand-drawn sketch to recreate that look for your views, but to be honest, editors come equipped with it even work for this. Skills to do it, operate in him. And I'll just draw it out. From there, take your scanner and scan a photo of your paper onto your computer. If you don't have a scanner, you can actually just take a picture, down of an angle as possible, and make sure that the lighting over the paper is even and bright. If you have any shadows that might run in a photo of your, bring that into Premiere and onto your timeline. Now to effect controls and then down to opacity. From here you have what's called blend modes. And if you want to check out more about blend modes, we have a video all about that. Check it out in the description below. But from here, under the blend modes, you want to select multiply. This will get rid of the white and keep the black elements. If yours isn't coming out right, you can try to use Lumetri Color to make the paper more white and even brighter, and this will help the paper to completely disappear. But if other parts of your paper aren't being cooperative, as long as well. The place where it's possible that a dark element won't convert fine, and just switch it kind of like chalk or writing with a pen on a blackboard. And create a display. I like to start at 0 and then end. Hi guys, Jordan with Motion Array, and today we're talking about text. We're going to give you 5 helpful tips to make your text look better in your next video. And that is already an example of rule Rule 1. Contrast. You need contrast for people to be able to read your text in the first place. Here are the green of text, so if you're having trouble getting to a yellow color, it just gets really hard to read. So if you're having trouble getting your text to be readable in the first place, here's some helpful tips for you to try out. Choose a text color and position so that no matter what it's up against in the frame, it's gonna stand out clearly. It sounds simple and like it's not even worth mentioning, but you'd be surprised how many professional productions actually get this wrong, including multi-million-dollar movies? Not pointing out any names. Another quick fix is to just blur the background. This way the text isn't standing out just based on color, but because it's the only thing that's in focus. But a more stylized version of this effect is to give a wash to your entire footage with a particular color, leaving the text a neutral color, like white, to stand out against. To do this, simply add a solid color to your project manager by right-clicking and selecting New Color Matte. Choose the color that you'd like, and then place it over your footage, but under your text. This will just create a solid color to act as the background of your text. But from here, you can play around with dropping the opacity of the color matte, as well as changing the blending mode under opacity in the Effect Controls panel to test out a variety of interesting looks that can help your text to make this color matte. Number 2, if you're not
Hi guys, Jordan with Motion Array, and today we're going to show you how to end a song wherever you want. So let's jump into it. So let's say you have a song that you want to end before the song naturally finishes on its own. There's a couple different options that you have available, including splicing the true end in earlier on the same beat so that you can't tell the difference. We've actually done a tutorial on that already, and it's this one here, and you can find a link to it in the description below. But it's very possible that you might not like the end of the song that you've got right out of the gate. Like this one, for example. It ends a lot more slow and gradually than I'd like. I want it to end with a quick punch. I'd actually much prefer it to end on one of these downbeats that occurs naturally in the song. I want to show you a quick and easy way to end your song at the exact spot that you want. And here's the basic overview of how we're going to accomplish this. We're going to start by finding the right spot where we want to end our song. We're going to set it up so that we can extend it with reverb, and we're going to add the reverb effect and dial it in. And then we're going to make sure that the whole effect meshes with the original audio. So to start with, let's find the end of our song. Keep in mind that it's much easier to end a song naturally on beat 1. What do I mean by that? Well, sort of like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you can see what I mean by it being on the first beat of the song. So what's next? Let's take this part of the song that we want to end on and cut it so that that's where our audio file ends. So we're left with something like this. It doesn't sound right at all, but that's okay. It doesn't take much to make it start sounding correct. Next up, let's take the end here and start stretching it out until we get to just before the point where the next beat or a noticeable part of the song starts to come in. Think about it like we're going to be taking a small section of just a couple milliseconds and stretch it out to sound really long. But we can only take what already exists. So ask yourself if you like the sound that exists at that given moment. As soon as a part starts to come in that you don't like, or that you would think would take away from the idea of it being the ending, make sure it cuts before that. With that done, take the point immediately after the downbeat of beat 1. You can usually distinguish each beat as the largest audio spike of each section. And make your cut there. So you should now have your main section of audio and then a small section cut to be on its own. And nothing should sound too different at this point. But now we're going to take this clip and nest it. Right click and go to nest. Now we have this clip sitting in its own sequence. So in our main sequence here, you can see that our ending to our song can't stretch out any longer. Holding Alt or So we're just going to fix that by going back into our nested sequence, holding Alt or Option and dragging this clip to duplicate it to a new layer. And we're just going to disable it because we don't actually need to hear it. We're just going to stretch it out as long as we can. The entire purpose of this disabled section here is just to make our nested sequence in our main composition able to stretch out much longer. This will give the reverb effect that we're going to add later time to ring out. And lastly, we're just going to add a quick fade out in our nested sequence. This fade out doesn't have to be very long at all. You just have to make sure that there's no abrupt, harsh cutoff. Now back in our main composition, you can see that this lets us stretch out our nested sequence even longer. Now it's time to add our reverb effect. And when we add it, it's going to have all this room to play with and reverberate out. So let's now go to add the effect. We're going to search in our effects panel for Studio Reverb. Drag and drop it onto your nested sequence, and you can start to make this effect come to life. And right off the bat, you might not notice a whole lot different. But we're going to show you the particular parameters to play with and some baseline amounts to get you where you need to go. Click on your audio clip and then go up to Effect Controls and hit the Edit button to go to your Reverb controls. The main characteristic that's going to help us get the effect that we want is called Decay. Your mileage might vary, but I like to set this anywhere between 5500 and 6500. We're just going to stick with 5500 though for now. And already this is what it sounds like. It's already feeling like a natural end to the song. Nice. But there's a couple things that we can do to really make this effect reach its maximum potential. Down here you can see that we have sliders for wet and dry output levels. Simply put, the more wet you make your sound, the more it's going to reverberate out. So if we take the dry output all the way up and the wet output all the way down, this is what we get. And conversely, if we switch it up, now, even though you might think that putting the wet output to its max would be the best, it might not actually keep the tone